Imagine you are 22 years old. You are a rugby player. You are laughing with your friends somewhere above the clouds. Your mother is sitting a few seats behind you. Your younger sister is next to her. You are flying to Chile for a game, and the world feels open and without limits. Then, the mountain appears in the window. Not below you, not in the distance, right there, filling the glass, impossibly close, gray rock and ice. And you have only enough time to understand what you're seeing before everything turns into noise and darkness, and the world as you knew it ends forever. 72 days, 45 people, 16 survivors, and a decision so impossible, so devastating, so deeply human that the world would debate it for 50 years. This is the true story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, the miracle of the Andes and the Valley of Tears. October 1972, Uruguay. In Montevideo, a group of young men prepare for a trip that makes being 20 feel magnificent. They are members of the Old Christians Club, a rugby team founded by former students of Stella Maris College in the Carrasco neighborhood. Most of them have played together for years. They know each other's voices in the dark. They have shared muddy fields and the unique brotherhood that forms between men who bleed together in sport. The plan is simple. Fly over the Andes to Santiago, Chile, where they will play a friendly match. To save money, the club's president chartered a Uruguayan Air Force Fairchild FHMB 227D. To split the cost, players invited friends and family to fill the seats. And so the passenger list of Flight 571, departing October 12, 1972, included not only players, but parents, cousins, girlfriends, and old friends who simply wanted to see Chile. 40 passengers and 5 crew members, 45 souls. Among them, Nando Parado, 22, strong, a business student, devoted above all to his family. Behind him, his mother Eugenia and his 19-year-old sister Susana. He had invited them himself. It was supposed to be a wonderful trip. The plane made it as far as Mendoza, Argentina, before the weather turned. Strong winds over the mountains made crossing dangerous, and the pilots decided to land and wait. The team spent the night in a hotel, relaxed, confident. Tomorrow they would cross the Andes and be in Santiago by afternoon. The next day, the winds had not fully subsided, but the pilots, Colonel Julio Cesar Ferradas, a veteran of 29 Andean crossings, and co-pilot La Guerrara, still in training and at the controls for this leg, decided to proceed. Because the Fairchild wasn't powerful enough to fly over the highest peaks, the flight plan went south to the Planchon Pass, a lower opening in the mountain range, then turned west toward Chile. At 2:18 p.m. on October 13, 1972, Flight 571 took off from Mendoza. Inside the cabin, the rugby players joked, sang, tossed a ball around. Nando talked with his teammates. His mother and sister sat a few rows behind. Somewhere over the mountains, the co-pilot made his mistake. At that altitude, the Andes were covered in clouds. The mountains below were invisible. Based on his calculations, La Guerrara believed they had already crossed the pass and were now over the Chilean valleys. He radioed Santiago Control. They were approaching Carico, the waypoint that signaled it was safe to turn north and begin descending. The controller cleared them to descend. Neither side knew there was no radar coverage in those mountains. The aircraft was still inside the Andes. The altimeter was faulty. The timing calculation had failed. They were not over Chile. They were deep in a range surrounded by peaks rising nearly 5 kilometers above sea level. The aircraft began to descend, not toward an airport, but into a glacial valley surrounded by mountains. Inside the cabin, the joking stopped. A passenger looked out the window and said quietly at first, then with rising alarm, "Aren't we flying too close to the mountains?" The pilots saw the rock wall rising ahead. La Guerrara pulled up, trying to climb, but the Fairchild didn't have the power for such a desperate maneuver at that altitude. The aircraft pitched upward violently and began to stall, shaking, tearing through thin air. Then it hit. The right wing struck first, ripped clean off. The left followed. The tail section hit a second ridge and was torn away completely, taking 3 people with it. The fuselage, now a hollow aluminum tube without wings, without tail, without any means of flight, became a sled, racing down an icy slope, bouncing, tearing, until it stopped in a snowfield on top of a remote glacier. The silence that followed was unlike anything these young men had ever experienced. 12 people died on impact. Among them, pilot Ferradas, his chest crushed. Nando's mother, Eugenia, died in the crash. Co-pilot La Guerrara survived only to die the next day from his injuries. 33 people survived the first day. Nando Parrado was not among the conscious. He had suffered a skull fracture and lay unconscious in the snow. His friends looked at him and believed he was dead. His sister Susana was still alive for a short time, and he stayed with her until she died 8 days after the crash in his arms. Nando was 22 years old and watched his mother and sister die on the same mountain. He did not collapse. Something inside him made a decision in those early days, clear, cold, almost mechanical. He would not wait to die. He would leave the mountain or die trying. That decision would save 16 lives, but it would take 72 days and an unthinkable choice to get there. In the first week, the food ran out completely. Whatever was in the gallery, chocolate, crackers, jam, was gone. Hunger returned with force, and there was nothing left. No animals, no plants, only ice, rock, and the dead. The dead were everywhere. Some had died in the crash, others in the days after. Their bodies had been moved away from the fuselage and left in the snow. At that altitude and in that cold, they were perfectly preserved. The survivors began talking about what they were all thinking. If they wanted to survive, they needed protein and calories. There was only one source available. The debate lasted days. Some refused. Some said nothing. The devout Catholics among them struggled deeply with it. Was it a sin? A desecration? The decision came down to survival. They were starving. They used the bodies of the dead to survive. They ate, raw and dried in the sun, and they cried while doing it. On October 22nd, 9 days after the crash, they heard a radio report. The search had been called off. Authorities believed no one could have survived. The realization broke them. No rescue was coming. Nando decided he would climb out. On October 29th, an avalanche hit the fuselage at night. 8 people died. The survivors were trapped under snow for 3 days before digging themselves out. 19 had been inside. 11 came out. Weeks passed. More died. Systems were created to survive the cold. Clothing was improvised. Tools were built. But the mountain kept taking lives. By December, 16 remained alive. Nando decided to attempt an escape with Roberto Canessa and Tintin Vizintin. On December 12th, 60 days after the crash, they began climbing. They had no map, no proper gear, and almost no food.
After 3 days, they reached a summit and saw only endless mountains. They were not near civilization. They were deep inside the Andes. They continued. After 10 days of travel, starving and exhausted, they descended far enough to see green grass. Then they saw a man on horseback. His name was Sergio Catalan, a Chilean herder. Nando wrote a note explaining they had survived a plane crash and needed help. Catalan understood immediately and rode for help for 10 hours. On December 22nd, helicopters arrived. 16 survivors were rescued, 72 days after the crash. The world celebrated, then learned the truth